check out with an interview. I'm talking about Michael Letts, the founder, president, and CEO of Invest USA. Grateful for his time today when it comes to what in the world is going on with China. Now, as far-fetched as the idea may sound, we're going to hear from this law enforcement veteran about why Americans should be concerned because China suspiciously escalated its space program. Now, you hear things here and there, but what do we really know? A lot of us aren't studying that every day. Hell, we're talking about all the backlash from go woke, go broke companies and those situations that are going on. But now we talk to our expert, Michael Letts joins us. Michael, good morning. Thanks for jumping in on cancelthisshow.com. How concerned should we be about what China is doing in space?
Well, we need to be very concerned about it, Vic. It's always a privilege to be on your show, and thank you for this opportunity. For quite some time, let's give your viewers, your listeners, a little bit of background. Obviously, China is a communist society, has never been in favor of the freedoms and the democracy that we enjoy in this country. And as such, they have one objective. Communism always has an objective. It's world dominance. Well, Russia has the same thing, but China was not up to par as Russia or the Soviet Union, shall we say. The Soviet Union initially was at the time. We started our space program back in the 60s, as you will recall, under Kennedy. And there was the race. Everybody remembers the big race between the Soviet Union and the United States of America, so who would get the first man on the moon, who would explore space first, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the United States of America won that race. But we kind of basically, okay, we've won. Let's move on to something else. Russia has continued to escalate and move forward on its space program. They developed the International Space Station. But where was China in all of this? Well, China wasn't at that point yet where it was fully developed and able to keep up and move forward as the Russia and the United States were. So, of course, there was also probably an ulterior motive. China did not want to be on a program that was run by various nations. There's a treaty with the International Space Station that those that participate, the United States of America, the former Soviet Union, Russia, and other participants, that they would never use the space for militarization. Well, China's not a part of that treaty because China did not opt to become a part of that space program. Instead, what did they do? They opted to do their own. They've got their own space station, and then they've got their own space programs. And now, keep that in mind. You have to remember this about China, about communist China. Everything that is done in China is ultimately run through its military program. The military controls China. Everything that's done pushes their communist agenda of world dominance. So keep that in mind. Any program they participate in, one especially that they put money in, they have an objective to. They have a mind. Their happenstance doesn't occur in China. Yeah. It's all well thought out and planned. Well, let's talk about real briefly, give an overview, then we'll pick it back into the space issue. So China has decided that if it's going to have world dominance, what is standing in the way? Well, the United States of America or what's left of it. The United States of America and our freedoms and democracies still pose a major issue to world dominance by China. So what can they do to further assist in bringing about the demise of this great nation? Well, they picked up a couple things in the last couple of decades that have worked exceptionally well for them. First of all, let's talk about how they're going to deal with our populace internally. Two things that are keeping them from being world dominant. American populace, which has a love for freedom. And second of all, American populace, which has a love for firearms. And we're an armed nation. Makes it a little harder to take it over to overthrow. So let's take a look at what they've done. Well, let's take a look at the populace to begin with. China is the lead export for fentanyl. They partnered. Yes, I'm using that word. They partnered with drug cartels. They have determined to make sure that they bring across an open border. Now, before we talk about all that they've done, let's talk about how they're able to accomplish it real quickly, Vic. I think most of your audience knows, but the Biden administration is beholden to and owned by the Chinese Communist Party. We can see that they've got put millions, 15 million, I think it's the count so far and rising as to what they have given to Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and this administration. The Chinese communists don't do anything for free. They give you $15 million. They expect something in return. And of course, on this particular issue, we can't find anything in return that they have gotten. Infrastructure, shall we say, hardware from the United States, other than access and policy decisions by Vice President Biden at the time, now President Biden at the time. And so they're calling in, their chips are due, they're calling them in. And so now, how are they able to, first of all, accomplish destroying our young people? They're getting fentanyl across an open border. They push the open border policy. The Biden administration is all too happy to comply because the fentanyl industry is the drug industry and human trafficking, sex trafficking, some of the biggest industries in the world. And they provide tremendous cash flow. And that cash flow goes back into people who support those policies, the Democratic National Committee and Democrats on the ballot itself. Now, so they're using fentanyl to go after our young people. They continue to go after our military through the electronic spy program. We all know the balloons. It's interesting. Again, what did the Biden administration do? They wait until you come in and get all the information you're looking for by hovering the balloons overhead. Then once you go out to sea, then we decide to shoot you down. Yeah, it's meaningless. They made sure that the Biden administration had everything that they needed for those satellite programs. Some other interesting facts that perhaps your viewers and listeners don't know: they have Chinese police stations here on American soil, violating national sovereignty. We have 13 of them we're aware of so far. The count is rising continuously on a daily basis. What do? They go into a city, New York being one, San Francisco being another, and I can just continue to name them off. They buy or rent space close to a police station so that they can put in electronic eavesdropping devices. They monitor dissidents that come from China because you remember they don't want anybody criticizing China or its communist policies. They harass those people that do, and now they're using it to harass American citizens. These are actual Chinese police agents. The first time that anything has been done is when there got to be enough publicity to where there was pressure put on the Biden administration. The Department of Justice issued some arrest warrants, but here's what's interesting. They put out the list of those people way in advance so that those in those Chinese stations in New York were quickly able to leave the United States, go back to China, and be replaced by counterparts, by different agents that came back and continue to pick up where they left off. So you can see they're building their network of intelligence. They're doing what they can to destroy our infrastructure. You know, they've gone after us in terms of our economic system, the banking system, some of the collapses that we've had out on the West Coast. And now, what is the next stage they've done? Well, they've got their space program. And so they determine, why is the space program particularly important to us? What is the relevance? What is the basis behind what they're trying to do? Well, you know, when it comes down military prioritization in terms of nuclear devices, intelligence gathering from satellites, et cetera, there's no better place to be, Vic, than to be in space.
No, we are. We got it. You've got a ton of information. Talking with Michael Letts, the founder and president and CEO of Invest USA. I feel like we could just pull the string and you'd go for like 10 hours.
No, that's good.
There's a ton of concerning material right there that blows people. It should blow people's mind.
Okay, here's the thing. When listening to you, it seems like we are always doing the headlines that you talk about. You talk about how $15 million Biden's in the back pocket of China. Yeah, everything you said, we have a headline about. Why are we so asleep as Americans, and why is the military so asleep, and what is going on? And this doesn't exactly, where are we going with all of this? I mean, we're bankrupting our country. We got the open border policy. Everything you say, we kind of, the American people know. Okay, make some sense of that now. Now make some sense of it.
All right, let's make it. Remember, I told you there's two objectives for world dominance. We have to destroy the democracy that America has, and we have to destroy the firearms that its citizens possess. Let's talk about the second aspect. And yes, China money is behind what I'm fixing to tell you, and we can prove it. So when you're talking about firearms, we have the Second Amendment. Everybody's pro Second Amendment. Of course, certainly I am. Everybody's go, wow, we got the Second Amendment. Nothing can ever happen to this country. Not true. Here's what they have attempted to do, because remember, this is not happenstance. This is a well thought out policy and procedures that they've implemented. So what did they do in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s? Okay, we're going to put people in Congress. We're going to do away with the Second Amendment. Didn't work too well, because the American people at least caught on to that. Don't do that. I mean, there were a few of them that passed through, but not many. Never could get the support to get it done. So what happened with COVID? People respond to fear. So what have they done now? They have implemented a state of fear across this country for violent crime. How did we get to that point? Let's talk about that.
Was that on purpose, or was it like just an opportunity that they took?
No, it was on purpose. It was well planned. You say, how could you say that? Well, you take a look at the criminal issue before. It did not spike near the way it has in the last decade. What has happened in the last decade? There's been the creation of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, George Floyd issues, and others. What did they do with those opportunities? Well, very simple. They ordered law enforcement to stand down. They had mainstream media go out and film. So here you've got cities burning, people rioting, beating each other up in the streets. And then you go to a shot of a line of officers just standing there. And what was the implication that they wanted America to know? Gee, these are the people you're paying to defend you? They're racist. They're buffoons. They're idiots. Now, notice their emphasis was only on city and state police, nothing on federal, only on city and state police. And so they began to do a perception that they're buffoons. They don't know what they're doing. So then we go to the next stage. Well, if they're buffoons, why are we paying them? Let's have a defund the police movement. We can do much better by getting counselors and other people out here to reduce
Was
crime.
that organic? Was that an organic push? I always wondered that. Did that just come out of nowhere, or was that fed by somebody like a George Soros?
No, it was fed by Soros. This is all, and the communists. Here's the interesting thing: you go back and look at the money. Soros is not the only one funding these. Communist Chinese Party has an active role in where their money goes.
Don't they have an active role when it comes to the situation in the fight against Americans owning their own guns and Second Amendment rights? Because we hear headlines and we see headlines, and some degree has been attached to, quote, Chinese media against guns in the United States.
Well, China, again, you remember we talked about it as we first got onto your show. They have an ultimate objective. Folks, China is not stupid. There are some brilliant people, and they have decided this is the objective. Now, how do we get there? We don't just sit around and say, well, what's going on today? Let's take a look at it. They have a well thought out, orchestrated plan to reach their objective. And now we're talking about the guns issue. So they went in to defunding the police. They created a sense among law enforcement that you're not appreciated. We're not going to give you the necessary equipment. That's one of the reasons why we have the charity that I represent here today, Unveils USA. You can see my vest in the background, and officers need those vests all across the country. We can talk about that in a minute. But they made sure that officers were no longer paid for what they were, the worth that they have. They've never been paid, but at least they de-escalated that. They actually took money away from it by defunding the police, made sure they didn't have the necessary equipment, and put out a basically broadcast across America. Law enforcement is a very poor choice for a career. You as a young person don't want to go into that mess. Nobody likes you. Everybody hates you. They're not going to give you anything for it. So why would you even consider raising a badge? Now look what they have, the scenario they have created. We have our law enforcement, our first responders, who many were put out because they wouldn't take the vaccine. They were fired. We now have many that are quitting because, quite frankly, never has there been a time in our history where there have been more officers attacked and killed in the line of duty. Morale is lower than it's ever been. The suicide rate is higher than it's ever been in first responders. And now we have nobody that wants to take their place. So we have people, law enforcement officers, that say, you know what, I've had enough. Here's what's shocking, Vic. We had over 3,000. I want that figure to sink into you for a minute. 3,000 New York PD officers who are willing to give up their pensions and walk away because they didn't think they could survive for another year or two before their retirement office came. It was that bad in law enforcement. People walking away from their pensions to get out from it. When that story gets out, right now, let me tell you, as I go across this great country of ours all the time, handing out vests, talking with my fellow brothers in law enforcement, the number one issue is nobody wants to wear the badge anymore. We're losing them faster than we can retain them, and nobody wants to put on a badge. So what does that do, Vic? Let's talk about the practicality of that for a minute. I give you protection with 100 men. Now I'm down to 70, 60. You're still expecting the same protection. What do I have to do to my 60 men now to get that comparable to where I had the 100? I'm overworking them to death. What do you think is going to happen to the other 60 that are getting overworked to death that I'm not paying them for? Remember, I have a defunding problem. And I have given them no support from their council or their local government. We are headed to anarchy. You remember that is the issue that the communist China, they wanted to destroy democracy, and they wanted to make sure that they seize our weapons. Now, how does this get back into the weapons?
I hear.
China's doing what they want to do.
I hear you. I hear you, and I totally. You're dead on. I have these same thoughts every night, but I wondered to myself, is there any light at the end of the proverbial tunnel? I mean, here's the thing. We're awake enough to be really pissed off about transgender beer, and we're awake enough to not bring our kids to Target over the weekend when they're trying to do the show. Are we awake enough to go, wait a minute, what's going on around here? Or do you think that this, like I said earlier, that the plane has already ran into the side of the mountain?
No, I believe we're close. I believe if we don't grab that yoke and pull it back with all of our might, we will not clear the mountain. We're going to hit it broadside. But I believe there is enough time left to pull it back. And it's shows like yours, which is why I'm so excited to be on your show today, that I think will make the difference. What is the difference that needs to be made? Well, let me real quickly finish telling you what's going to happen on the gun issue. So the feds have already said, they've already come out publicly, never fear, the federal government is here. The buffoons, that's talking about the city and state police, can't do it. We will step in. And by the way, let us tell you what our solution is. Violence is caused by guns, not by the people that shoot them. It's caused by the guns itself. So don't you worry. We're going to eliminate guns, and we're going to make sure this violence comes down. That's where they're headed. Now, how do we thwart their efforts to destroy what's left of this country? Well, we're at a point, ladies and gentlemen, in the society of ours, to where our top law enforcement agencies, that's the Department of Justice, that's the FBI, are not just being weaponized and politicized. We're beyond that. They're actually committing felonious acts. When you take, let's just use a quick illustration too, so that people don't say you're just running your mouth, you don't know what you're talking about. Let's take a look at felonious act from the FBI. Let's look at Russiagate. There's a way we conduct criminal investigations, okay? First of all, you can make an accusation against me, Vic. First of all, I have to determine whether it's a crime or not. You may not like the way I comb my hair. Nothing to it. I don't go to jail for that. So that case gets dismissed. But if you make an accusation, we do a cursory overview to see if there's any laws that have been violated. Well, the DNC and Hillary Clinton made a cursory overview that there was collusion between the candidate Donald Trump and the Russian government. And so based on that cursory overview, yes, that's a crime. We need to do what we call another cursory investigation. And that's just to make sure, is there any substantiation to what you're saying? Right. Okay. I can make accusations all day long. I got to have something, not everything, because that's what a full investigation does, but something to continue to open a file and to move forward. Well, they did that cursory overview. And here's what's interesting. In the response to that cursory overview, not only was it said, no, you don't have enough evidence, the evidence that they had was actually dispelled and proven to be false. It was false information coming from the DNC, from Hillary, from saying that there were connections with Russia when they were not. They knew that the information was not just not good enough, it was false.
And everybody had culpable deniability, correct? It was like, every time you see CNN and you see Brennan and those guys, it's like, well, you got to be really safe about all this stuff,
And it makes you wonder China's involvement in all of this, which is why we had you on in the first place.
And then so you're saying right now, how, and this is the question, how does the thousands of people in the CIA, FBI, DOJ, how do they have a cabal behind closed doors somewhere? And they are all coordinated in this. And I'll give you one example. The one stupid ass document that they're trying to get from Christopher Wray right now. How does Christopher Wray not just go, yeah, here's your document, have fun with it? I mean, was that document that was produced, is that going to be a thorn in the side of this whole operation?
Oh, it's going to be a huge thorn in their side, quite frankly.
Or is it not? Or do they know how to handle, if you're doing something this big, don't you have a contingency for all of these little sidebar matters?
They do have a contingency, Eric. Let's talk about, I'll give a quick sidetrack to what you're talking about there. Let's talk about their contingency, not ours, but their contingency. Yes, it's going to have a huge implication, the issue, the form, and the information of the witnesses, because they're all credible. So what is their two major thrusts that they use? You'll notice in every case, not just in a few, every case, their first initial defense is, oh, you're right. We need to take a look at this. It's now under investigation. Cease comment, cease discussions. Nothing else can be said about it. We'll get back to you. Now, it may take us 10 years, but we will get back to you once we have decided whether there's anything merit here. They bury it. Second thing they do while they're doing that is then they go, because remember, they have the information. They go to the witnesses. You know what? You screwed up. You open your mouth again, and we're going to make sure you're not around any longer. And yes, our government does that now. Shameful. That's what the Russians did. The Soviet Union used to do. But yes, our government's involved with that now. And so that's how they keep these things under lid. But unfortunately, I think the American people, here's how we solved all those issues that you're talking about. because of the fact that those, and what I was telling you about on the issue with the FBI, when you use false information, it's false to proceed warrants and,
Mm-hmm.
and investigations. That's a felony. That's not a misdemeanor. That's a
Right.
felony. You have committed a felony. Our Department of Justice, when your Attorney General lies to Congress, I will not in any way involve myself in the investigations of the president's son. And then you find out it's the Attorney General who's ordering the IRS agents to be disbanded and all. That's not the obstruction of justice. That's not a misdemeanor, guys.
Yeah.
That's a felony. Okay. So when your top law enforcement agencies are committing felonious acts, then the next question is, where do you go from here? What do you do? You have one agency less that has any ability to stop what's going on, and that's called the military. And the military has been quiet up to this point. But what happens? How do you engage the military? Well, our Constitution gives us a particular avenue. It's called military tribunals. First of all, it's in the Constitution. Second of all, the War Powers Act reinforces that. It actually expands it from the commander-in-chief being able to appoint a military tribunal to actually to the Speaker of the House and to Congress being able to appoint a military tribunal. What does a military tribunal do? Well, now remember, people say, well, they deal with the military. No. That's a court-martial. That's a military court. This is a military tribunal. There are two distinct differences in those terminologies. A military tribunal was set up to be able to go after civilians, contractors, and or commanders-in-chief, anyone who involves or is involved with the compromising of national security. Okay. Now, let's take a look at what we have, that everything we've just talked about with China, with a government who has sold itself out, with classified documents and information that end up in garages next to Corvettes, et cetera, et cetera. There is ample evidence that national security has been compromised at best. At worst, it has been destroyed in some areas. So a military tribunal is certainly within order. What does a military tribunal do? A military tribunal takes the evidence. It has 30 days to review the evidence. No, it doesn't have 10 years as somebody else says it's under investigation and we can't talk about it. Who does the investigation? No, it's not the senior 4-star generals. It's junior grade officers. That's captains, majors, lieutenant colonels, colonels. People who, quite frankly, who have just come back from having brought bodies home in body bags, defending freedom in Afghanistan, Iraq. We could just go down the list. People who know what this country is supposed to stand for and who know is he being compromised every day. They're the ones that review that. What do? They make a decision. Is there any evidence that proves that there has been a violation of the law, judicial law? If there is, what are their recommendations? Now, here's the great part about it. They don't say, okay, Vic needs to be arrested. Send it over to the Justice Department, which has already been compromised, not going to do anything with it. It's the military that then takes the action. And quite frankly, that's what we need in this country. We have two options. We either have a military tribunal or we have an American Revolution. It's one of the two. I'd rather use a military tribunal.
With a Millie and all these other guys over there, don't you think they're compromised as well? I mean, you see these guys putting together transsexual dances up at in Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska. Don't you just kind of go, man, these guys are in on it too a little bit?
Yeah, and the scary thing is, there's a tie with China. There is.
Yes, there is. But notice who you're talking about. You're talking about the 4-star senior general officers. Military tribunal does not engage senior military general officers. It engages the junior officers. And those are the people that we are having to count on to carry this country. That, look, you've been there long enough. You've fought. You've had men serve under you. You have seen the cost of freedom. Now you have seen it be compromised. What are you going to do?
That's true. Let me ask you this then. So so they have this kind of level of rolling their eyes at people that bring up stuff like Dominion, and they have this thing where they roll their eyes at Hillary Clinton. All of a sudden you have this very
Hunter Biden.
All of a sudden you have this very hardwired problem between Joe Biden and this document. Who are the badasses in the House of Representatives and the Senate that are going to push this thing through? And like you said, not within 10 years, but within 30 days, how does this whole thing roll out in your opinion? And this is the only thing that I see that they got. I really don't see anything else that they have. They can't push back because you got 50% of the country that's on their side and 50% who's not on their side. So they're doing whatever they want to do.
And here's the point to address that, Eric. It's very simple. And this is what I tell people all across the country as we have these discussions. A military tribunal is charged with one thing. It is junior grade military officers who serve as the jury. They're sequestered. There's no TV cameras. There's no, oh, want you to read about this or hear. They take the evidence. They review it. The evidence is substantiated or it's not. If it's substantiated, these are the laws that were broken and these are the penalties according to our Constitution. Now, that's exactly what they do. And quite frankly, that is what this country has to have now. We're not in a position to do anything else, as you said, because we have so many people that have been compromised. But most of them have been compromised who are in senior positions. And why were they compromised? Quite frankly, when you talk about China, how does China compromise people? They got money.
Yep, that makes sense. Talking with Michael Letts, the founder and president and CEO of Invest USA. At the heart of all of this and why we had you on, and of course, China gets into this, they get into that. I mean, you look at everything that's happened in this country. It's the 34th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square event. You've got the FBI caught protecting two firms tied to Chinese government regimes holding U.S. voter data. That's going on as well. Footage released of near collusion of U.S. with Chinese destroyer. That's going on, a collision out there. Where does China sit now with this space program, and why should we be concerned?
Well, as we talked about initially when I first came on your show, I gave all the other things that China has done to circumvent. Space is the last frontier. And quite frankly, if they gain dominance, which is where they're headed, because you remember, we're not paying, especially under this administration. You remember the previous administration created a new division in the military to deal, because they understood that space is the next frontier. You control space. You control the ability to gather intelligence. You control the ability to launch nuclear arsenals from space. And you have the ability, they're actually talking about colonization of the moon, making it a military base. You have the ability to do that. You have one up on everybody else. And quite frankly, you do that in conjunction with what we've talked about, destroying what's left of the American democracy. You now are the big boy in town. You now have world.
Why isn't that part of the vernacular of the conversation that we're having right now? When you hear I don't hear any candidates talking like this. I hear them talking about pushing it back against Disney. Why doesn't DeSantis or for that matter JF Jr. Why are none of the candidates saying, all right, let's take a breath here. Let's talk about the real problem here. And why aren't we hearing more of this conversation? Because this is so important. It's unbelievable.
Well, I think it's very simple, Eric. They're scared. You remember I told you one of the things that's so tragic about the COVID-19 is it drove home the point that Americans respond to fear. Americans are fearful. That's not the kind of country we used to have. You know, my grandfather landed on Omaha Beach, okay, under heavy fire. I mean, we're all fearful, but we do our jobs. We do what we know is done to protect America, to protect our precious freedoms. They are now think that America has lost that ability to take its fear and translate it into courage to do the right thing. And because of that, our candidates don't want to talk about anything that really makes you fearful. Let's talk about Disney. Oh, yeah, we could, Disney's bad. And I'm not saying it's not. Disney's bad, but it's something that it doesn't strike a vein of fear through our hearts. Let's talk about China. Whoa. Those are people that we may or may not be able to control. They may or may be able to control us. Yeah. I don't want to talk about something that makes me scared, that makes me fearful. Let's talk about something else too.
No,
and you don't have candidates with enough backbone and enough gumption to stand up and tell the truth. That's
what about SpaceX? Blue Origin. I mean, do we have a chance to compete with China in space?
There's no question that we do. No question. Look here, in my prior service, military-wise as well, I can tell you this: the spirit of the American people is unsurpassed and unmatched anywhere in the world. And one thing drives it, and that's what kills China, Russia, and anything else. People yearn to be free. And when you are defending freedom, you are willing to give it everything you've got, versus when you are defending whatever you're defending because you're being paid for. At some point in time, you realize, you can pay me a lot, but if I'm dead, it doesn't do me any good. So that is one thing they will never be able to conquer in America, is our spirit of freedom. So they're doing it from within, and they're causing our nation to collapse from within, and we don't have enough backbone of politicians and statesmen that are willing to sound the alarm. The American people are hearing it, but they rather, let's not talk about this on your show. Let's talk about something that we think we can have a ability to easily fix and not have a fearful
Have you
confrontation.
ever taken a look at demographics? Like, I think you're right. The boomers and Generation X is they're like, oh no, from my dead cold hands kind of guys. You're not taking our freedom. But you have these millennials and these Gen Zers who are way more amenable to socialism and Bernie Sanders and AOC. Do you ever factor that into your equation at all? And
I definitely do.
Okay.
And this is one of the things that is of concern as well. I mean, there are so many issues we could be for the next 24 hours on your show and not even scratch half of them. But of course, the Communist Party, and of which China is obviously one of its main proponents, also understood one other thing, that education is a key thing to controlling a populace. And so our public education system, which is dominated by our union system, has made a point and effort for the last few decades to make sure that the information being given to our young people was anti-America, anti-heroic, anti-values, anti-principle. And we've got two generations now that we're seeing that went through those systems, and that they are beginning to, at the age now where they can exercise what they've been taught. And quite frankly, the only thing we could do to undermine that and to straighten it out is they need to see the consequence of their actions. I tell people this all the time across the country. We've lost the word accountability in this country. You're not accountable for anything you did anymore. You're a victim. And as long as we don't make sure that people understand, regardless of whether you did something good or you did something bad, you alone are accountable for what you did, and you will be held for the actions of what your thought and process was. Till we get back to that point, we don't have a country to save. But I think it's all, what I'm trying to say is we put it all in the mix. I think it all can be salvaged. I think it all can be saved. I think America's greatest days are ahead, but they will only be the greatest days ahead based on the courage and the principle of those who are
Okay.
willing to stand.
Before Vic asks,
Yeah.
here's a question, and I have a running debate with Tabitha, who's not here right now. She seems to think that you're right, that the only way you can fix this is a revolution, and I guess she's talking about the kind we had in 1865. But I have a different opinion. I kind of feel like the revolution is going to be done in U-Haul trucks, that you're going to put your stuff in a truck. You're going to go to a Florida, or you're going to go to a Utah or a Montana if you want that freedom. And that the blue states, they're just going to get bluer and bluer and bluer. Is that kind of the way that you think about this, or is it kind of an all for one and one for all kind of a thing?
No, I think they're both distinctly separate, but they're also intertwined. I think you're already seeing people flying from red states. The problem is you still have a federal government that still controls it all and will control what red states can and can't do. That's where the dilemma is going to lie. And that issue has to be addressed. And so we have to ask ourselves, do you divide yourself into two countries, or you just fix the problem to begin with? Because quite frankly, even in the blue states, and I realize that the media proponents would say there's a 50%, we're equally divided. I think that's BS. We're not equally divided. I think the vast majority of Americans still believe in principle and values. I think we have two generations that are coming up that need to be taught that. But quite frankly, I don't think the vast majority of Americans want to live in a society that we just described with China or anything else, violence, crime, et cetera, et cetera. And we are exposing how this philosophy yields that kind of a production. And most Americans reject that. And I believe they're just looking for somebody to lead them through the way to the promised land, if you will.
Been talking with Michael Letts, the founder, president, and CEO of Invest USA. Before we talk about what you do, I'm curious when it comes to your comment that the Biden administration isn't doing anything. If anything, they're cooperating with China, whether they want to or being compromised. Is there anything from an international standpoint that we might be able to do with other countries given a new president in 2024 from a conservative standpoint?
Oh, I think it's endless. I think Trump proved that. I mean, when you have come from a position of strength versus weakness, when you demand respect and have the ability to back it up, you would be amazed. Because quite frankly, let me be very blunt. Let's talk about what's going on in the media internationally. Look at the media clips of the people pouring into the streets. Spain, France, we could go through the list. People yearn to be free, whether they're in America or whether they're in Africa or whether they're in France or whether they're in England. But they have no hope of being free unless they realize there are some leaders that are willing to help lead them to that freedom. And they have not had that. Biden has been the worst that we've ever had. But you bring a true leader back into the White House who commands the respect for not for himself, but for freedom itself.
Who do you like? Who do you like in this presidential election? Because people like you will be listened to. You have a lot of analytical breakdown and the reasons why a DeSantis over a Trump or a Trump over a DeSantis or Nikki Haley. Who do you like in this presidential election?
Well, a little bit of background on myself. I've served in public office for 30 years.
Okay.
So I know every player that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
They all have great viewpoints. But this is what I tell people. We're not at a stage anymore in this country where we can talk. We have to have action. There's only been one person who has, because it is so bad, and I want to emphasize that to your listeners and to your viewers, America is in crisis. We have never been in a position that we're at today. And because it is so corrupt, when I say it's in crisis, our judicial system is corrupt, our law enforcement system, I can go on and on. Because it is so corrupt, they are entrenched and determined to hold on to that power at all costs. Okay. And they exercise that by firing their barbs continuously back and forth. The only person that I think that can do it is the one who survived it for the last 4 years. And quite frankly, I think has the wherewithal and the means to continue to be able to do it
now,
again.
Didn't he have the chance to do it for 4 years, though? Or how do you...
He did do it.
Now he has to come back and
we
literally
had China in the palm of our hands with
he was also fighting against a deep state, which we didn't even think there really was a deep
and
state.
And now we know it.
Way deeper than we thought.
We thought it was just books and novels that the deep state was in. It's like, oh damn, they're really there.
I like what Lindsay just said. It was much deeper than anybody ever realized, much deeper even than President Trump realized. And I mean, we're exposing that now, and it's time. I make this statement all across the country. Folks, we took an oath. The oath didn't have an expiration date. If there ever was a time I need you to re-engage, it's now. Because America is not being destroyed from without anymore. It's being destroyed from within with the help of people from without.
Michael, what do you say to people who think Donald Trump caved in 2020? And what do you say to them that, to some Democrats and other people that think he will never see the White House again? What do you think about that?
Well, I think twofold, we work our way backwards. You'll never see the White House again. That would be easy to say, except for when you go to his rallies. I've never seen people, even today, attend an outpouring going to rallies versus any other candidate, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, doesn't make any difference. I've never seen such an outpouring of support anywhere, even as of today. Okay, did he cave? He did some things that I wouldn't have approved of. And quite frankly, I'm sure I do some things that he wouldn't approve of. But nobody is perfect. We weren't electing a pastor or a preacher. We were electing a president.
Correct.
But we remember also that we were electing an individual. And there's not a single one of us that has ever done everything that can't be said. You really make a mistake from time to time.
So day one, he has to walk in and basically clear out FBI, CIA, DOJ, he has to literally go in there and just clean house, right?
And then deal with China.
Is that right?
I mean, my God.
The only thing I differ with you, Vic, is we got to deal all at the same time. It's almost an overwhelming task. And this is what I tell the president, President Trump. You got to make sure you have enough people with you who have the same passion and backbone and who will not cower and will not cave. Otherwise, we can't get the job.
Hey, we have a guy. His name is Drew. He's a fantastic liberal on our line, and he says rallies don't mean anything, and he's kind of right. Biden had 10 people in circles on his last run, and Trump had an entire stadium in Alabama at his rally, but he lost. Can you explain to Drew why rallies actually do mean something this time?
Well, twofold. First of all, rallies demonstrate the sentiment of the people. Well, let's be very blunt. I got a lot of busy things. So do you. I'm not going to a rally if it doesn't mean something to me. Okay. It's not like I'm a homeless and couldn't find anything else to do. So it shows where the heart of the country is at. As to the second point, he who controls the election integrity controls the outcome. And quite frankly, the Democrats have done that, positioned themselves for years to be able to do that. There has been more corruption in our election. For anybody that buys that BS, that our elections are of utmost integrity and nothing ever goes wrong with them, is just literally stupid. I grew up in Mexico. I lived in a foreign country. My parents were missionaries. I can tell you what the manipulation of elections is like. And quite frankly, there's no difference now in this country than there is in other third world countries.
Hey, Michael, we wanted to make sure before we let you go today to talk about Invest USA, what you're doing, which has something to do with what your career's been about and who you are right now.
Well, let me quickly tie it in. Everything we just talked with China. Why is all this important to invest? Because quite frankly, at the end of the day, it's going to be our first responders that are going to help to provide law and order to this country, and they need to know what they're up against, and that's why it's so important for everything that we're talking about. Invest was created 30 years ago because our all law enforcement officers did not have the necessary equipment to protect themselves and be able to come home safely to their families. They had 52% of officers who had no bulletproof vests. That's called a concealable vest, the one you see underneath their shirt. It only stops a sidearm, by the way, a pistol. About 2 decades ago, a decade and a half ago, our criminal element got smart. They figured that, you know what, we'll just go ahead and penetrate those vests with long-range rifles. And that's what they have been doing ever since. They've been ambushing our officers. And so we had to stop and create new technology. It's called active shooter vests that have titanium plates that will literally stop any round on the market. Unfortunately, 90% of officers still do not have this technology. And it's a shame. I've been down on the border handing these vests out that we have the cartel coming across the border, out-manning, out-gunning, out-protected than those who are trying to protect the American people. There's literally no excuse for it, and I hate that we have to have a charity to do it to begin with, but I'd rather go ahead and save lives and worry about the consequences later than I would to watch them die in the line of duty, as they are so willing to do.
Michael, we appreciate it. How can people jump in with Invest? How can
They'll go to our website. That's www.investusa.org. Now, remember, it's a charity.org. All these commentaries, everything that we're doing, their ability to donate, their ability to make a difference in saving America in these final days and keeping our freedoms intact. They'll just go to our website. Let me just put in one final little plug. If you don't do anything else from this audio, I want you to do one thing for me. Our law enforcement officers have never had it more difficult than they've ever had. If you see one today, just wave your hand, say thank you for your service. Thank you for protecting. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to buy their meal. That'd be nice, but you don't have to do anything else. Just say thank you. I appreciate your service. And we will see this country turn around when we begin to be recognized and begin to defend those who are defending us.
Michael Letts, the founder and president and CEO of Invest USA. We appreciate the time we have with you. We'll get you back on. We are grateful for that. And by the way, you have my phone number. Can you text me your number again so make sure I have your name on there?
I'll be delighted to. God bless you. Y'all have a God bless America. This country still has hope. It's just we need the leaders to lead it to the promised land.
God bless you, Michael, and thank you.
All right. Have a great Monday.